Iran is denying it's in talks with the United States after Donald Trump suggested the two sides were seeking an agreement to end the war. The announcement from the US president on Monday came after his weekend deadline for Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz was approaching. While Donald Trump buys himself more time, Israel continues to strike targets in Iran. The IDF announcing it struck some 50 targets, including ballistic missile storage and launch sites. And the country's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is warning there's more to come. Charlie James reports.
Once again, Donald Trump's ultimatums are shifting. After giving Tehran 48 hours to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face strikes on the country's power plants, the U.S. president extended his deadline for 5 days on Monday. He insists this is because big progress has been made in talks with Iran.
To determine whether a broader agreement can be reached, we've had very good discussions, very good discussions, and it's only because of the great job that our military did is the reason they mean business. They want to settle, and we're going to get it done, I hope.
Trump claims Iran agreed that they will not have a nuclear weapon, and he surprisingly proposed joint U.S.-Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. But so far, there has been no confirmation of these talks from Washington or Tehran. Egypt, Turkey, and Pakistan are reportedly acting as intermediaries, passing messages between the two capitals. But in public, Iranian officials are denying any contact. Iran's parliament speaker responded online Monday, accusing Trump of lying and looking for an off-ramp.
No negotiations have been held with the U.S., and fake news is used to manipulate the financial and oil markets and escape the quagmire in which the U.S. and Israel are trapped.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard also says that it is unwilling to negotiate, and strikes continue on both sides of the conflict. Iran fired missiles at Israel, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia Tuesday, and Israel says it will continue attacks in Iran and Lebanon. Meanwhile, U.S. allies, including Turkey and the European Union, are pushing hard for a diplomatic solution.
We can now bring in Scott Lucas, Professor of U.S. and International Politics at the Clinton Institute at the University of College Dublin. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. What did you make of the timing of Donald Trump's announcement yesterday? Is the U.S. president looking for an off-ramp here? Is he trying to calm the markets, or is he just buying time?
The timing is the easy part, which is that on Sunday, Donald Trump threatened to obliterate Iran's infrastructure, including its electricity, if the Straits of Hormuz remained under Iranian control. But the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, far from backing down, said, well, you do that, we'll destroy infrastructure across the Middle East. Oil prices went up, stock markets went down, Trump got rattled. Therefore, he makes this statement. What's more important and more difficult is to establish the facts behind the statement, because almost everything Trump said was not true or an exaggeration. And I'll just give you a quick lead in. We've known for days that the Trump administration has reached out to the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi through the envoy Steve Witkoff with text messages. Now, there have been no details released on that. What has changed in the last few days is that people in the Trump camp have now decided that the Iran parliamentary speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, could be a leader they would want to deal with. They're framing it as being similar to the Venezuelan model, where the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, was promoted after they kidnapped Nicolas Maduro. An Iranian official confirmed on Saturday that the White House had indeed reached out to speak to Ghalibaf, but you just posted Ghalibaf's response, at least publicly, which is you're just trying to get out of a quagmire that you created and to manipulate the financial and oil markets. So at this point, there's no confirmation that we are going to have these talks involving U.S. officials and Ghalibaf in Pakistan or anywhere else.
I want to talk about those intermediaries that have surfaced, among them Turkey and Pakistan. Turkey and has great relations with the U.S., and Pakistan as well has great relations with the U.S., but relations between Ankara and Israel are fraught. Pakistan has no relationship with Israel. How can Donald Trump say he wants to end the war if Israel is not being consulted?
The same way that he ended Israel's 12-day war in June of 2025, when the Iranians sent a signal through Qatar and a demonstration strike on the U.S. airbase in Qatar that said, look, you can deal with us. Trump accepted it and told Benjamin Netanyahu to cease fire, even as Israeli warplanes were in the air. Now what we have, yeah.
But he's
Go
not
ahead.
tried to rein in Israel, because we know that one of Iran's strategies here during this conflict has been to retaliate on GCC states, and they have been doing this since this conflict broke out, right, since the get-go. But he hasn't tried to rein in Israel there, all this time. So why would he try and do it now?
Well, because the question here is what are the aims? Now, the Israelis are going for regime change. They don't want anyone connected with the existing regime to remain in power or even to remain alive. The Americans are looking for regime surrender. That is, look, give up your nuclear program, give up your ballistic missile program, but the regime can stay in power. Thus, the idea of the Venezuela model. And because of the differences in those two approaches, you've got a gap right now. The Israelis are going to continue to pound away at Iran. And by the way, expand the occupation of Lebanon, which they're doing today. And meanwhile, the Americans are thinking, all right, can we get the type of Iranian regime that we want? Now, I don't think this solves anything. I think we'll be in a state of limbo, but it means that we do not have a single war on Iran now. We have an Israeli war on Iran, and we have an American war on Iran.
The Iranians have made it abundantly clear that they are not going to turn into some vassal state to please the U.S. president. So where does this leave things? Are we back to square one, essentially? Because even if there is a parliament speaker, I mean, the theocratic structure of Iran is still in place.
Yeah, I have no idea where the Trump camps think this is going to be a breakthrough. I think it comes from the same misconception they had on February 28th, when the supreme leader and dozens of officials were killed, and they thought, well, the regime will now collapse. Well, it quite obviously hasn't collapsed. The military haven't split from the politicians. The politicians are not splitting from each other, even after the killing of Ali Larijani, another senior figure, last week. So I think here, this is sort of wishful thinking by the Trump folks that they can get the regime to capitulate, and they keep throwing out these lines to the media, because even if the regime doesn't capitulate, it buys Trump time. It buys Trump time in that the oil markets don't spike, the stock markets don't sink, and he isn't completely adrift with domestic opinion back in the States, which a majority of whom are against this war in the first place.
You mentioned that Iran did threaten to retaliate if its power plants were struck. It also said that it would mine the entire Gulf, place sea mines on the entire Gulf if anything happens to its islands off its coast. I'm talking about Karg Island. And there are reports that the U.S. President Donald Trump is mulling the idea of some sort of U.S. takeover of Karg Island to pressure the Iranians to loosen their grip over the Strait of Hormuz. But given that Iran is not sitting idly by, Iran is retaliating, will the U.S. president risk digging himself into a deeper hole if he goes and does something like that?
Again, I need to emphasize the Trump administration are just throwing everything out there. So at the same time that they said, all right, we're moving amphibious assault ships with Marines in, perhaps they could hit Karg Island, perhaps they could hit the coastline. You have the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, saying, oh, it's okay if Iranian ships go through the Strait, or Chinese ships, or Indian ships, and then the administration lifting sanctions on 140 million barrels of Iranian oil, thus giving the regime $14 billion. So the Trump administration is looking for an off-ramp. And on the one hand, they think the off-ramp could be, well, we'll strike them harder, for example, taking Karg Island. And then they think maybe our off-ramp is to accept an Iranian control of the Strait. This is not a coherent approach. They just are looking for something to stick at this point. But I think we get back to the point, which is it isn't going to be a regime surrender. They're going to need the regime to talk to them at some point.
We'll see how this story plays out. It's very interesting indeed. Scott Lucas, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.
Now, Iran continued to fire missiles into Israel this Tuesday. Several passed through Israeli missile defenses, with damage reported in the north as well as in Tel Aviv. According to first responders, 6 people were treated for injuries at multiple sites in the city, but no deaths were reported. Now, as Scott mentioned, Israel's defense minister says the IDF will control the remaining bridges and the security zone up to the Litani River in Lebanon. The statement comes after the far-right Israeli finance minister said the Litani River should be Israel's new border with Lebanon.
The current military campaign in Lebanon must end with a fundamental change in the situation. Beyond the defeat of the terrorist organization Hezbollah, the Litani River must be our new border with the state of Lebanon, just like the Yellow Line in Gaza and like the barrier at Mount Hermon in Syria.
We can now bring in our correspondent, Claire Bacala, who's covering the story for us from Beirut. Claire, good afternoon. What have authorities been saying to Israel's escalated offensive in the south of the country?
Well, since the very start of the war, there's been a fear here in Lebanon, and it's really ramped up in the last few days, with the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun saying that Israel's targeting of key infrastructure, including bridges which link the north of Lebanon to the south, could be a prelude, feels like a prelude to a full-scale Israeli ground invasion into Lebanon. The Lebanese president has also said that targeting this infrastructure, vital infrastructure which Lebanese civilians use, is collective punishment for Lebanese civilians and a violation of international law and Lebanon's sovereignty. Humanitarian organizations have also been speaking out, saying that this is making it much harder for them to get supplies, get aid, get food, bottled water and medicines down to the south, because even though Israel has called the whole of the south of Lebanon a red zone and told residents that they need to leave, some have stayed, many have left. There are over 1 million displaced Lebanese at the moment, but some have stayed in their communities, saying they want to stay and protect their homes, but also they don't really have anywhere else to go. So if they were to move up to the north of the country, they could find themselves living in the streets, living in tents, living in their cars, and they don't want that. All this is happening, of course, as Israel says that it is targeting vital infrastructure. Yes, but vital also to Hezbollah. Israel wants to stop Hezbollah, prevent Hezbollah from funneling weapons and fighters down to the south. And Hezbollah is continuing to launch attacks into northern Israel, targeting areas in northern Israel with drones and with rockets too. So this recent escalation that we've seen in the last few days is not showing any sign of slowing down for the moment.
Claire, strikes also continue in Beirut's southern suburbs. What sort of damage are you seeing? And does it feel like Israel is any closer to dismantling Hezbollah, considering, over in Gaza, they've gotten flattened the entire enclave, but Hamas is still in control?
Well, the southern suburbs, the Hezbollah stronghold, are behind me. That's the area that you can see behind me there. And there were several Israeli strikes overnight there. I've not been looking around there this morning, but I was there the day before yesterday. You need Hezbollah permission in order to film in those southern suburbs, and we got that a couple of days ago. And what we saw was eye-opening in terms of the amount of destruction. The whole area hasn't been flattened by no means, but in the neighborhood that we were in, there were several buildings which had been flattened. And you can see mattresses and sofas and chairs, children's school books scattered across all over the place. There's a strong smell in the air. That neighborhood that we're in has mostly been evacuated because Israel has also told residents in the southern suburbs, the Hezbollah stronghold, to evacuate. And from time to time, Israel will also issue extra evacuation warnings, saying that a particular neighborhood in the southern suburbs, people need to get out. But it doesn't always. Israel doesn't always order these extra evacuation warnings. And we did meet an elderly lady in the southern suburbs who was living on her own. She was still there, and she said, I don't have any way to evacuate. I don't have anywhere to go. What am I going to do? So I'm staying here for now. What's interesting, though, is that there is quite a clear difference between the destruction you see in the southern suburbs with where I am in central Beirut. Now, we have had strikes. We saw strikes here in central Beirut last week, but the vibe is different. The city is, well, there's a contrast between those southern suburbs and the center of Beirut. And you can see that contrast as well in the city of Tyre or Tyre in the south of Lebanon, where a large part of the city is in the red zone, so the Israeli evacuation order zone, but some of the city, the old part of the city, is not. So residents there haven't evacuated in it, and life is almost going on as usual with shops and cafes open. So there really is a contrast, and I think it's worth underlining that for people. But there are strikes, and no one feels safe anywhere at the moment in Lebanon, but there are strikes where it's particularly areas which is particularly risky and areas which people feel slightly more safe in.
Yeah, the Lebanese are so used to this sort of thing happening again and again. Thank you very much for that, Claire Bacala, reporting there for us from Beirut.